There's a lot of information in this presentation today, so I'll go through it as quickly as possible, and we'll have a chance for question and answer, or if anybody has any questions. Before I get into the content, though, I do want to make some introductions. I'm Erica Bentley. I'm the Director of Pre-Award Grant Services here in the Eberly College of Arts and Sciences at WVU. We have with us today Leah Marie Heron. She is our Grant Administrator. Duncan Lorimer, our Associate Dean for Research, will be joining us. He's not on yet, but I know he will be joining us soon. Lee Thorpe is one of our graduate assistants. We are very pleased to have Lee help us and have Lee on the call. And Claude Akins is our other graduate assistant. He's not able to be with us today, but those of you who work with our office, I'm sure you will interact with Claude at some point in time. And of course, I want to introduce Katie Schneller. She is the Director of Pre-Award in the Office of Sponsored Programs, and she's going to be chiming in and telling us about her experience with attachments and give us some additional information as we go along. So I'm just going to go ahead and go into it. If you have any trouble hearing me, please stop me and let me know. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or just go ahead and ask. All right. Okay. So let's click on the presentation. Here we go. We're going to talk about grant application attachments today. Obviously, we can't talk about every single attachment that's going to go in every single application to every agency. There's no time to get into the details for all of them. We'll talk a lot about NIH and NSF because that's the majority of the applications that we see in our college, but we also see NIH applications, Department of Justice, Department of Defense, Office of Surface Mining, EPA, excuse me. The attachments are going to vary across the board depending on the agency and the opportunity. So always read your guidelines, and note that this presentation is October 12th, 2021. Things are going to change. So, always make sure you're looking at the most current information. So we'll talk about standard attachments that we see on a variety of applications. We'll go over some of the changes to NIH and NSF applications. We'll talk some about the internal attachments that WVU requires in our KC system, talk about some common errors, and give you guys some helpful hints that will hopefully save you some headache as you develop your grant applications. So, as I mentioned before, read your guidelines. Always read the most current version of your guidelines when preparing a grant application. And then with the specific solicitation that you're looking at, also go to the other links within that solicitation for other guidelines. For example, if you're looking at an NSF solicitation, it's also going to have a link to the new PAC guide that is current. So you're going to want to go and look at that information. If you work with our office or other offices on campus, we're going to be looking at those things for you, as will OSP. But I still think it's really important for you to understand, what they're requiring and what is current, because these things change. These forms change. The agencies change their forms. They differ in the information that is required. So you've got to stay on top of those guidelines. And if you get our newsletter, we try to provide updates on when things have changed. But we're not going to catch everything because there are just so many different agencies out there and so many different forms. We do have validations, which are nice in some of these new electronic systems, but don't rely on the validations to catch every mistake in these attachments and forms because they're not set up to do that. And we're seeing more and more comprehensive checks, but don't rely on those checks. And of course, contact us or your grant administrator, wherever you are, if you have questions about any specific attachments. So why are attachments important? Attachments give us more information outside of your project narrative. It's got important information. You want to have a nice, cohesive, professional looking application package where everything looks consistent, from the narrative to your references to all of the different documents, because it's going to make you look more like you've planned this out, it's well thought out, and that you didn't just throw in information without making it applicable to that particular solicitation and that application. Attachments are important for the agencies. It gives them institutional information about who's submitting. It gives evidence that the institution is compliant with agency requirements and that the PIs are allowed to be the PIs. It gives the agencies standard information that then they can input into their systems. And it gets the application to the right place for review. You're going to see information on these forms similar, but maybe in different places. But it is important information. It can be time consuming, but it is important to make sure that everything looks good. The reviewers are going to see your attachments. So you want to make sure that they're well thought out and they're not just thrown together at the last minute, and you definitely want them to be in compliance. Why? Because you do not want to be rejected without review. That's going to be your worst case scenario. Or that you go to submit at the last minute and the system will let you because there's an error. But even worse is to have done all the work and submitted your application and you thought you were ready to go, and then a short time later, you get a notice back from the agency that your application was not even reviewed because of an error with a form. I know of somebody who worked on a $13 million large institutional grant application. They forgot one form. It was rejected without review. They didn't have multiple levels of review, so they didn't have anyone else check it. So that's why I think I lose a lot of sleep over these things, and Katie probably does as well, because we're that line of defense to help make sure that we're catching all of these components that are necessary for your application to get a fair and full review. Right. I mentioned automated checks before. We are seeing a lot more automated checks in our online application systems, which I find to be reassuring, but it can also be a little bit overwhelming because, you know, we've had several people who have been submitting in FastLane through the NSF, and now they're going through research.gov and they're bringing up all these new automated checks and all these new errors and warnings that are really throwing our faculty off. They're important. It's great that we have those automated checks, but don't rely on them. Allow our office, allow sponsored programs plenty of time to check these attachments. That's why they have a 5-day review period at OSP, because there are so many things not included in this list that could be incorrect and could put your proposal in jeopardy. I do want to go to this link real quick. You can see the grants.gov checks, and then the ERA Commons, which is NIH's assist system on the right, the kinds of things that they're looking for. If we go to this link real quick and open this attachment, these are the NSF compliance checks. Here's a 27-page document of all of the automated checks within that new research.gov system, based on the type of application and what they're checking for. So there are a lot of things that could be picked up by these automated systems. It's nice that we can see it before we submit, but keep in mind, if you're submitting in FastLane, all of these still apply, even though you're not going to get them picked up on an automated check. So it's nice to have these systems to help us catch things, but there are a lot of things to consider. So it's important to take your time and give yourself plenty of time to develop the applications and to review your guidelines. And at the end, we'll go over some common errors. So I have some, I'm sure Katie has seen a whole bunch that we can talk about. Anything you want to add yet, Katie?
No, not yet, but I'll definitely chime in.
All righty. Okay, let's talk a little bit about our new NSF and NIH guidelines. Why are these agencies always changing their guidelines? Why can't we just use the same biosketch that we used last year? The Federal Demonstration Partnership has been working on trying to standardize a lot of the information requested in these federal grant applications. So there's 10 federal agencies right now working together with several institutions that receive federal funds. you're going to see that you're going to be providing the same type of information to all of these agencies in time. They're not all on board. They're not all standardized yet. But that's what they're working towards. So in time, it's going to be less administratively difficult to submit grant applications because you're going to be providing the same information to all the same agencies. It would be great if they were all in a similar format, but we're not there yet. So they started with similar terms and conditions on grants, and they have several phases. So in response to that, there have been new changes to some NSF and NIH attachments that have recently been released. So effective, I guess last week, the new NSF path guide has been released, and any applications submitted from here on out until they release the next path guide must follow the new guidelines. They have increased the page numbers for biographical sketches, which is nice. For anyone who submitted in the last year, you might remember that they had the new requirement for the fillable forms or using SciENcv to generate your biosketch, but only allowed for 2 pages, which was quite difficult for people to squeeze in all the information that was required. So they've expanded that to 3 pages, which is really nice. The current and pending support page document has been updated. Now they want to see information on the objectives of each of your current and pending projects, as well as a description of any overlap between the project you're proposing and the projects that are pending or have already been awarded. So it's going to take a little bit of extra time and thought on your part to put this together, so keep that in mind. They both reference this new table, if you want to look at it, to see which documents require what information and in what situations. That table is helpful. You can see significant changes at this link there, and then there's also a webinar about the significant changes. So, and Lee has been kind enough to add the hyperlinks to the chat of a lot of these hyperlinks within the presentation. So you guys can get a copy of that after the session if you'd like. Right, now, NIH is switching to Forms G. Seems like we just started using Forms F, and now we're going to start using Forms G as of January 25th, 2022. So if you're working on an NIH application, if it's a brand new funding opportunity, the Forms G application packages should be available October 25th. If it's an FOA that was posted before October 25th, but has a due date on or after January 25th, sometime in November, they're expecting that the new FOAs will have links to the new Form G. The big changes are they want us to start using a unique entity identifier instead of a DUNS number. I think we're going to probably be seeing this across the board for all federal agencies. I think it's optional now in some forms, but soon it's going to be a requirement. They also are changing the biographical sketch page and the other support format, which we'll talk about here a little bit later. And one big change is all senior key personnel must have an ERA Commons username. Before, you could be, well, if you weren't a PI, you didn't have to have an ERA Commons username, but now you do. So if you're going to plan on an NIH application and you have collaborators, work with them early to make sure that they have an ERA Commons username so you aren't scrambling at the last minute to get that added, or you won't be able to submit the application for that. Okay. Standard attachments, as you can see, there are a lot. There's a lot of information. But when you're asking for hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, of course, they're going to want to see a lot of information about you and your institution, and they want to know why you're qualified and that your institution is qualified to manage you. So there is a lot of information. We're going to go through some of these in more detail than others and provide some other resources for some of the attachments that are just way more in-depth than we have time to discuss today. Cover sheet, standard form 424 or the SF 424. This is a standard form for the submission of grant applications to the federal government. It collects information about the type of submission. Is it new? Is it a resubmission? Is it a grant? Is it a cooperative agreement? The type of applicant. Are you a nonprofit? Are you a hospital? Your start and end dates, your budget totals, where the project's going to be taking place, and a lot of other information like that. Different agencies call these different things. So the NIH, it's an R&R cover, or application for federal assistance, or the SF424 R&R. Katie, what do you have to say?
Oh, nothing. I was just turning my video.
Oh, okay.
That I would be
Something
more
exciting
present.
to say about cover sheets, because it's a very exciting topic. The NSF calls it a cover sheet. In grants.gov, it's an application for federal assistance, or the SF424 mandatory form, or the SF424 R&R. They vary based on application and what information is required, but the information is pretty much the same. Again, if you have an office like mine, grant administrators you work with, we do these things day and night. We could probably fill them out in our sleep. I've actually had dreams about filling them out, which is pretty sad. But don't wrap your brain trying to figure out how to fill out this form. Reach out to us for help. We can do it a lot quicker than you probably can if you're not used to all these numbers and all the information. Budgets. I can talk about budgets all day long. I do love a good budget. It's like a piece of art. I enjoy doing budgets, and we did a grant master class, a budget master class presentation last year. So Lee, please put that one in our chat. If you're interested in a more in-depth discussion about budget development, you can check that out. Of course, budgets are going to be a big part of your application. Every form is going to look a little bit different, but they're going to ask for budget details somewhere in almost every grant application. They're going to be called different things. At NIH, it's an R&R detailed budget, or there's a modular budget form, which gets even more exciting and complicated. Grants.gov, a lot of times you'll see the budget information for non-construction program, the SF424A, or they can have an SF or a budget, an R&R budget, I believe they call it. The information is going to be similar, but always check your guidelines and check your form budget. If your form budget has the line items in a certain order, you're going to want to put that same order in your budget justification, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the form is important. We also use internal spreadsheets, for us to get information to OSP, but these budgets are the official budgets that go to the funding agencies. So you want to make sure they are correct, calculated correctly, and don't be afraid to reach out for help as you develop a budget. Things to look for: start and end dates. I don't know how many times I've started a grants.gov grant budget and then added a year, and I forgot to update the dates because it pulls the old dates over. A lot of times it does the same thing with base salary information. So you're going to want to make sure each budget reflects the information for that budget year. Use your current base salary plus any supplements. Make sure your fringe benefit rates are current. Calculate that modified total direct cost base correctly and the F&A. If you go in and fill out an online budget form, then you make changes to your internal budget and you forget. Those forms, the modified total direct cost base and the F&A generally don't calculate on their own. So you're going to want to go in and double check and make sure all of those are correct in each year. And the NIH modular budgets, if you have a faculty member who gets paid more over 12 months than the NIH cap, do not exceed the NIH cap. If it is an R&R detailed budget for the NIH, we want you to use the actual base salaries. So this is in our budget masterclass. We'll talk about this. I'm sure Katie would be happy to share information if you have questions about this. But this is the general guideline that we are following in terms of when to use the cap and when not to use the cap.
And if you don't mind, Erica, can I just throw in 2 best practices here?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought I was muted actually, but so just to throw in 2 best practices, one specific to modular and one specific to R&R detailed budget. So I'll do the modular one first. And I think you guys usually do a really good job of this, but just as like a general best practice, if you are doing a modular budget, especially one that has like a subboard in it, or other things that are exclusions, that sort of thing, but especially when there's a subboard in it. If you're doing an internal budget spreadsheet, and you base it on your actual expenses, let's say $243,000, which of course in the modular format would round up to 250. But if the internal budget keeps the actual amount, the 242 or 243,000, and then it calculates the MTDC base with the exclusions, but based on the actual dollars in the internal budget, then you're sometimes people, when they're not as familiar with the process, and again, this is not you, but sometimes people will put, oh, the MTDC base amount that's calculating with the formulas in their spreadsheet and plug them into the modular form, when it's, oh, but you actually have to start with the modular total because you round it up to 250 and then calculate from there what your base will be. And again, I don't think that that's ever something we've really it happens from time to time, and it's not usually anything that we've had a consistent issue with, but I like to mention it just as a best practice item. And then your note about the R&R and using actual base salaries, I just wanted to mention that over the past year, we've had a few cases where there had been concern when you've got people who are above the salary base. This actually happens more in health sciences when you've got people who have clinical components on top of their state components. But let's say you've got faculty members in your budget who exceed the cap by a significant amount. And when you put in their actual base salary, it inflates the budget past the direct cost limitation that NIH has, where you'd have to get special permission to go over $500,000 in direct costs on any given year. And so we had cases where we know that the expenses will be less than that cap because we know NIH is going to impose the salary cap if they award it, but it looks like we're going over the limit without permission. And what do we do then? And so when those occasions have come up over the past year or so, we've just sort of in advance reached out to the contact person for that program and say, we're planning on using the salary cap so that we don't go over the direct cost limitation for the program, just to be on the safe side. And we tell them that, and we write it into the budget justification. In a detailed budget, we would use the actual base salaries. Please note that we have used the cap so that we're not inflating our budget beyond where we're allowed to go with this particular program. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful.
It's just a weird, it doesn't happen that often, but when it does, it's a conundrum of like, how do you do, how do you meet what the expectations that NIH has without really causing suffering on this side with trying to make your budget work for the program. Right,
that is very helpful. And we also did an NIH session. So on our website, we have the video resources, and there's also a big discussion about NIH grants. And I think I talked a little bit about R&R and modular budgets in that one as well. So if you have questions, let us know. It's not always black and white. There definitely are situations where we have to think about things a little bit differently and then justify it. So thanks for that, Katie. Mm-hmm. All right. So budget justifications, budget narratives, again, different agencies want it to be called something different. If the agency lists that they want a budget narrative, name it budget narrative. Don't name it budget justification. Show that you've read the guidelines and that you are, giving them what they're asking. Sometimes these are part of your project description or your project narrative. Sometimes they're standalone. So again, read your guidelines and figure out what it is that they want. It's a detailed breakdown. Why do you need this money in each of these categories? Provide all the specific details. Make sure the dollar amounts match the budget amounts on that actual form, because your spreadsheet may round a little bit differently. So you want it to be exactly to the dollar matching in your justification as it is on the official form, not just on your internal spreadsheet. Sometimes they want all years justified. Other times they just want the first year justified. I had one recently where they want the full year, first year justified, and any changes to future years justified. Like, it depends on the agency. So again, read your guidelines and give them what they're asking for. NIH modular budgets don't require a full detailed budget justification. They want to see a personnel justification with the role, number of person months, an effort with no dollar amounts. If you have a subaward, they want a consortium justification that rounds the total amount to the nearest $1,000 with their personnel justification and an explanation if they're a foreign organization as well. And then if you are doing a modular budget and you have modules of different amounts over different years, they're going to want to see an additional narrative justification that explains why. And that's not always the case. If there's a grant that only allows $275,000 over 2 years, you can't have the same number of modules. It's just not possible. You don't have to provide it in that instance, but read the guidelines and ask if you're not sure, and we can explain when you should or shouldn't use that additional justification. But in year one, if you're buying a $300,000 piece of equipment, you're not going to be able to use a modular budget. If you're buying a $100,000 piece of equipment, and your year one budget has 4 more modules, then you're going to want to explain that in that additional narrative justification, as well as what costs were excluded from the modified total cost base, and any work that's being conducted offsite should also be explained in that additional narrative justification. So these take a long time. Travel justifications are painful and time consuming, and there's a lot of room for error. Reach out. We have wonderful grad students in our office. We're fortunate that they get to do this painstaking work for us. We do them too, but it takes a lot of time, so give yourself plenty of time and put out a well thought out justification. Again, you don't want to say just $2,000 for travel, because that's not really going to be what it's going to cost. And they know that, and you know that, and we know that. And when you get the money, it's not going to work out. So pay attention and spend time on these justifications. We're going to talk about Biosketches and current and pending support, but first I want to talk about SciENcv. It is a new, maybe not new, it's being used more widely now to help faculty gather information about your professional information, about your publications, your employment history, professional accomplishments, all in one place. And then you can pull that information out of SciENcv into different formats for Biosketches and current pending support. So in time, it will be helpful. It's kind of time consuming to get it up and running though. So I do recommend if you're planning an NSF application, get used to SciENcv now, go in and add your information. NIH has a Biosketch option now. And current and pending support is a requirement for the NSF, and it will be coming for the NIH in time. So, NSF Biosketches must be generated in SciENcv, or you must use the NSF fillable form that they have available at this link that hopefully we will put in the chat. 3 pages max now, which is great. They want professional preparation, starting with your undergrad institution. You wouldn't believe how many Biosketches we get that just stuff is in the wrong order. And when you're trying to finish your narrative and you're really excited about the application, we're like, sorry, please reorder your appointments. Now what you want to do, get it right in the first place. If you use SciENcv, it'll do it for you. Your appointments, they want them in reverse chronological order. Your products, up to 5 most closely related and 5 other significant products. And then up to 5 distinct examples demonstrating the broader impact of your professional and scholarly activities and the synergistic activities. I think we could probably do a whole session on broader impacts and synergistic activities, but they don't want you to give them a paragraph for each, right? They don't want to be like, was a reviewer for the NIH and the NSF and the CDC and like 5 different agencies. They would want each one of those to be a distinct example. So you're going to want to tailor your synergistic activities to your application. If you're submitting an REU, you're going to want to talk about times that you've mentored undergraduate researchers. If you're doing a conference proposal, you're going to want to show a synergistic activity where you have led a conference or you have been involved in the planning of a conference. It needs to be unique to or related to the proposal that you're submitting. Anyone else have any other thoughts on synergistic activities? I know we see a lot of things.
If you have questions, feel free to contact us and we can help guide you through what's good and what's bad.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Current and pending support, NSF, must be generated in SciENcv. or use their NSF fillable form. It's a PDF document. Luckily, they've changed it with the PAP guide. It used to be like, 15 pages long, and if you use the full fillable form, you couldn't get rid of the pages. Now it just includes the information that's actually been completed, which is nice. The current pending support, they're looking for overlap. And to make sure that you have enough time to successfully complete the project. They want to see that you're not overcommitted. So you'll see the list of all the information that they're looking for. Note that statement of overall objectives and the summary of any overlap are those 2 new sections that are required now as of October 4th. And for the NSF, be sure to include the current proposal that you're writing as a pending proposal. So keep that in mind. And the submission plan is something new this round that I don't recall seeing on a current and pending support before. But that is a box that is available to be checked now. So, all right. NIH Biosketches. They're 5 pages max. You must include your ERA Commons username. I've not seen one get rejected because of this, but there's a space for it, so you should fill it out. They want your title, your education and training, starting with your undergrad or initial training. A personal statement explaining, why you're a good person to do this research, what your history is, what you've done in the past, and how it relates to this particular project. You can include completed and ongoing research projects in the past 3 years in this section now. That used to be included under research support. That section is going away as of January 25th. But you can draw attention to those under your personal statement. You can also cite up to 4 publications or research projects. Your positions, appointments, and honors, again, reverse chronological order. They're getting consistent now, which is a good thing. If you have an old NIH Biosketch, it might be in the wrong order, and you might need to take some time to change that. And then the contributions to science. Describe up to 5 of your most significant contributions to science related to the project. Each one should be no more than half a page, including citations. Cite up to 4 publications or research projects. People get confused. We see people submit 4 significant contributions with 5 citations, and we are often asking people, hey, you got to remove one of these citations. So look at the guidelines. Section B, no longer part of it unless you're doing a fellowship application, and then you have to include your scholarly or your academic performance information. You can do an NIH Biosketch and SciENcv now, which is great. I haven't seen very many, but I think it would be helpful for those of you who submit to both agencies. I don't know if they'll require it in the future. Wouldn't surprise me, but I don't have any insider information there. Other support for NIH. Similar to current and pending support, you'll see everything there on the right of all of the required information. It looks a whole lot like all of the required information on an NSF. Current and pending, or CNP, as we often refer to it. Not required at the proposal stage, though. You will see in NIH Assist, there is a spot to put the other support document, but you do not attach it. It's not required at the proposal stage unless the FOA specifically says it's required. It's usually required at the just-in-time phase after the proposal's been reviewed. It's hit a certain benchmark in terms of K-line or score, and then you get an automated response and they will request that information. There is a format page they would like to see this information submitted on, and they are working on a SciENcv template for NIH Other Support. They say it will be available beginning of FY22. I haven't seen it yet, so. All right. Collaborators and other affiliations. This is an NSF form. It's an Excel sheet, which is just kind of awful. It's a pain. We see errors on this form all the time. It's nice that research.gov does validate these for us and tells us if there's issues. They use it to help with merit review, to get reviewers, and to also minimize conflicts of interest. So don't alter this form. Don't cut and paste into this form. Don't change the column sizes, don't change the fonts, don't try to add page numbers, don't convert it to a PDF. Just type in the information that they request. It's not the greatest form out there, sorry, NSF. And it is time consuming. And I have this listed, you know, later on, like some common errors, but recently we had somebody who listed some publications on their biosketch, and they didn't include the co-authors in their COA.
Yeah.
And the NSF came back and said, hey, we need an updated COA that include your co-authors, because they specifically want your co-authors listed, right? So this information is being reviewed and considered. So you've got to be thorough, you've got to be accurate and provide all the information. Don't put any text in the date column. It has to be just the dates. You can't put current or ongoing. Those will either get errored or they'll just get kicked out of the system when it's loaded into research.gov. So it's time consuming. Again, give yourself plenty of time. If you have questions, please contact us or your grant administrator. Project summary, project abstracts. Every agency is going to require something like this. Could be an executive summary. It could be on a specific form. It could be in a text box somewhere. For the NIH, it's a project summary / abstract. Cannot exceed 30 lines. So I literally almost every day look at one of these and count the lines physically to make sure. And make sure you don't have like an extra page. I've seen that happen before. People have a Word document, they convert it to a PDF and they're good, but there's like this extra page, and it has to be one page, no longer than 30 lines. I include the header in that 30 lines. What about you, Katie? If someone has project abstract at the top, do you count that in your 30 lines?
No, actually, a few years ago, I think that with some of the new automated checks, it became irrelevant. If as long as it's not in the header, then it seems to have become irrelevant, because if you exceed, at least I haven't experimented with it lately to test it, but the validation check used to cause an error if you did exceed the 30 lines, but it seemed to be smart enough to not count the actual title line. When in doubt, leave it out, though. I mean, you know.
Right.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
not.
Sorry
It's
to
not
everyone
obvious.
who said cut a line when you have a heading and it's counted as a 30 line. But I would rather be safe than have it rejected because you over the line.
I mean, that seems highly unlikely that NIH would reject it for that if it was like arguably, oh, look, an extra line. There was a spacing in between the header and the text began, or oh, we put a header. I mean, not in the margins, of course, but you know that we put a label. I can't imagine them, you know, but you never know. You never know.
Yeah. If it hasn't happened yet, it probably won't, but you never know.
Yeah.
And the NSF has changed. If you're doing a research.gov, it's no more than one page. Double check it, because we have some that we think is one page and then we load it and it says it's more than one page. So I think it was what, 4,900 characters, something like that is what it used to be.
Less than that, actually.
If you're doing Fastlane, you still have the boxes that you enter the information into for the overview, broader impacts, and intellectual merit. And you have to have those headings for the NSF on a single line. You can't say broader impacts, hyphen, and then start your text. It has to be a standalone line. So these nitpicky things are getting picked up by these systems. So be sure to be following the guidelines. Research strategy, project descriptions, project narrative. They're all going to be called something different, but it's the meat of the proposal. This is where you shine and you tell them about your wonderful ideas and how you're going to execute them and how you're going to evaluate them and who your team is, and you provide all that wonderful detail within their page limits using the proper fonts, margins, and line spacing. Leah recently did a great session on writing successful narratives that you should check out. That is on our video resources page. It also talks about project summaries and abstracts, how important those are to grab the reader's attention. So we could talk a whole hour about this, and we just did. So check out that session if this is something you're more interested in. Of course, have other people read it. Don't try to write it and review it and do everything on your own. Get some feedback because it is crucial. References cited from the NSF must have the names of all the authors in the same sequence as in the publication. The article, journal title, book title, all the standard information. Follow scholarly practices in your field if they don't specifically say which format they want you to use. If there's a website available with the citation for any publication, include that. And don't use URLs in the project description, but you can use URLs in your references. The NIH calls it bibliography and references cited, same information, but they want you to be including that PNC reference number or the NIH manuscript submission reference number if that's available. If it's not available, but it's in process, you can indicate that. Citations that aren't covered by the public access policy, but are publicly available, free and online, include those URLs in your references. So the reviewers can go and check those out. And check your links. You don't want a bunch of dead links in your references either. Make sure they are up to date and correct. And that's another painstaking thing that our grad students do for us from time to time. So if you really want another set of eyes on your references and you're in the Eberly College, contact us, we can help you with that. Facilities, equipment, and other resources is what the NSF calls it. Almost all agencies are going to require something similar. For the NSF, they want you to describe your resources just directly applicable. They don't want to hear about WVU libraries if you're not going to be using WVU libraries, right? It should be an aggregate description of internal and external resources available to the project if it's funded. It should be narrative, shouldn't include any dollar amounts. If there are personnel that are working on the project, but you are not requesting funding for them, if they're just spending a nominal amount of time advising a student or providing feedback or giving you access to something, you put that information in the facilities, equipment, and other resources document. Then that's not considered a cost share. If it's somebody who's spending significant amount of time on the project and you're not funding them, that is a cost share. NSF doesn't want to see any. So be thoughtful in what you include. We have boilerplates with all the standard institutional information that we're happy to share. Yeah, it's important. I am happy whenever we get reviews back from people and our environment scores are usually pretty good. So I think we have great resources here as an R1 institution. You're going to want to play that up in your facilities document. For the NIH, its facilities and other resources, there is a separate equipment attachment for you to describe your equipment. And it is a required attachment, even though there's no asterisk in assist. The equipment attachment is required. So even if you have no equipment, you'll have to put something in there that says not applicable, right? They wanted to see the scientific environment that the research is going to be happening within. I see these facilities and other resources documents that are much larger for an NIH application than NSF. No page limits on either, but the NIH applications do tend to include more information about, say, the CTSI, the WVU libraries, and we always talk about sponsored programs and a sponsored accounting group, and all these resources available to help the faculty member or the researcher be successful in their grant. We do have boilerplate again. I mean, we have a huge boilerplate document with resources all over the university and statistics that you're welcome to request, but be selective in all of these attachments and everything you submit. Keep the reviewer in mind, be kind to the reviewer. Don't give them a bunch of stuff that you're going to have to sort through. If they don't limit your CV to 2 pages, don't give them a 40-page CV. Be kind to your reviewers. They're going to give you a better review if they're not annoyed by all of the information that you provide.
And if you think about it, like, and I know you talked about this a little bit, but if you think about it, like, okay, the reviewer is going to look at what I said I'm going to do, and then wonder, specific to the activities you described, well, what about this type of resource or that type of resource? So those specific resources, not literally everything available to you, but those specific resources are what they're going to go looking for, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, so we don't want to waste paper. We don't want to waste everyone's time. You want to be thoughtful. And these and all attachments. I think we could probably do a whole session on data and data management. We're not going to today. The data management plans, almost every proposal that I see in federal agencies now requires some sort of data management plan or a dissemination plan, something that explains what data you're collecting, how you're going to share it, where you're going to store it, what the impacts are going to be. The guidelines are going to be different based on the agencies. Note that the NIH calls it a resource sharing plan, could also include plans for sharing, in addition to data, unique model organisms and large-scale genomic data. So read your guidelines, especially NIH, because sometimes they require a data sharing plan regardless of the amount requested. Other times they don't. It's not going to hurt to add it, but read the guidelines and make sure you're including it if it is required. We have some great resources on our page, on OSP's page, and there's this VMP tool I've never used, but it looks pretty cool that it can help you create a data management plan for your project. Maybe we'll do another research roundup on data management someday, not today. Performance site location information is almost always included. It's usually a form, not an attachment, but just wanted to note it because WVU is the organization, not the research corporation. Our congressional district for the Morgantown campus is West Virginia 001. We have OSPs, used to be called Proposal Essentials. I think it's Proposal Information page now that has all of our institutional information. You can get these numbers. And don't forget to include subawards. If they're doing part of the research at their campus, be sure to include that in their congressional district. So that is included in the application. Letters. Remember when I said don't provide a bunch of stuff that's not relevant to the project? Be thoughtful when including letters. There's different types of letters. Letters of commitment are letters that say we commit to doing specific things or providing specific resources. You're submitting an NSF application, they want you to use their specific language for letters of commitment. It's going to say, I so-and-so commit to do the activities laid out in the project description or something along those lines. Very short, succinct, use that exact verbiage for an NSF. Letters of support, that's a little different. It's like, we think this is a great project and we're really happy as an institution that the faculty member is submitting this and it's going to help make the world a better place, right? It's going to be more generic. A letter of support is generally not allowed for NSF unless it's specifically included in the solicitation. So read the guidelines and see what they're looking for. And don't just get a letter of support from like everybody in your department, right? Like, you want to be select. You don't want to provide a bunch of additional information. Be to the point, be unique. Don't write the same letter and send it to 5 people and have them return it with a signature. That is very obvious what you've done, and it's not authentic. So if people are supporting your project, you want an authentic, unique letter from them. And if there is any information in a letter of commitment committing to dollar amounts, that's a cost share, and that's committed. So don't put actual commitments in there unless the institution is willing to back it up and make it an official cost share. Would you agree, Katie?
Yes.
Okay. If we are not the prime organization, if we're a subaward to another organization, or if we're including a subaward in our application, at a minimum, we're going to want a statement of work describing what that institution or what we are doing on the project, a detailed budget justification, and an institutional letter of commitment. They will probably also want your biosketch and a facilities document related to the facilities at our institution. So we have a subaward checklist that we send out to other institutions as we're working with them. Hopefully the other institution you work with will have the same. But people always forget about the statement of work. So I wanted to mention that, but that's something that we want to send along so we can explain what it is that we're doing on the bigger project. Common internal attachments. These are things that are going to be required to go into the KC system if it's a sponsored project. And we're mostly talking about sponsored projects today, just in case you wondered. Federal grants, always get your OSP. That's really what we're talking about. If we're doing any federal grants, any state grants, we could have a whole session on what should be foundation and what should be sponsored program, but we're not doing that today either. These are the required attachments in KC. We want a task budget form for every budget that has faculty from more than one department, or just, more faculty than one, so that each faculty member gets their own task budget, that the budget is allocated to their department, that they get their share of F&A, that they can see it in KC, and that it goes into their digital measures. We have a great new task budget form that OSP has created. That's a spreadsheet. I think it's a great idea. I don't know where you got it. There's also the Word document.
Due credits deserved there, Erica.
Yeah, I created something like that a long time ago. Then there's the Word document, that's a supplemental Form A. It has the same information, it's just in a different format. I like the spreadsheet personally. There's a subrecipient certification form that's required anytime you have a subaward to make sure there's no conflicts of interest, financial conflicts of interest primarily, with any subawards that you have. They have a bunch of other forms and templates on their website there that you should go and check out. And if you have questions, reach out to OSP or reach out to us. We can tell you more.
And you might have noticed over time, whenever it's the opposite direction, when we have a subword underneath us and a proposal we're submitting, that a lot of other institutions have subrecipient commitment forms that we have to fill out and submit with the subaward documents.
Yep.
We have not historically had one. One is currently in the works though, and that will effectively replace the subrecipient certification form, since it will be just redundant, because anything that's in that form will be also covered in the new subrecipient commitment form. But it's not ready yet, but we will have one soonish.
Great.
That will then, of course, we'll have a massive communication to the university and everybody. Let everybody know, but it'll basically make things a lot easier in terms of being able to do risk assessment and collect the correct amount of information about subawards at the pre-award stage, rather than putting some of that work off to the later stages if it's getting awarded. And we want to look at things like making sure that any subaward institutions that are in a proposal we're submitting are compliant with all of the same guidelines that we're being compliant with. So we want to make sure that they have their own F&A rate included in their budgets, or if they don't have a rate agreement, that they're using the allowable de minimis rate for any federal projects of 10%. So we're going to be doing these more detailed checks on the subawards at the pre-award stage in the near future.
Great. I wondered if you guys were going to do that. We do see them from other institutions all the time, and they're quite nice. I like them.
Yeah, we're just a little late, huh?
Been busy. All right, we have 5 minutes. Oh my goodness. Okay, common problems. Unallowable fonts and font sizes happens all the time. Line spacing guidelines. If you're using a 10-point font, use a 12-point exact line spacing, or you're going to exceed that 6 lines per vertical inch. Tables, we see tables get pushed outside the guidelines, outside of the margins all the time. Don't go over your page limits, character limits, or line limits. Use the most recent format. Make sure your budgets and budget justifications match. Don't put URLs, even if there's not a hyperlink. Don't put URLs in your narrative documents unless they are specifically allowed. File name types, so like different agencies, like Leah mentioned, the NIH has very specific file naming conventions, and other agencies do. And sometimes the NIH does, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes the NSF does, and sometimes they don't. So be very specific in your file names if they require that in guidelines. Some helpful hints: use rulers and guidelines in Word. Real quick, I'll show you how to do that in Word. I don't think I can access Adobe on this screen. But if you're in Microsoft Word, you can go to View and click this lovely grid lines button. And it's going to show you where your margins are. And if anything is outside the margins, it's going to show. If we change our margins real quick to something else, you'll see that's the new margins. And down here, you're going to see this table. It is outside of your margins. So that's a quick little handy tool. I know those of us who review grant applications all the time use it all the time. There's a similar function in Adobe Acrobat, so if you can look at that PDFs. We talked about the COA, that weird thing where they had some authors who weren't included on the COA, but they were in their publications. Again, look at the guidelines because there's time limitations about what period they want those authors, co-authors shown on the COA. All right, that was a lot of information. We have 3 minutes left. If you have questions, you can reach us here, all of us, all of our contact information. Any questions from the group? Anything in
Thank
the
you,
chat?
Erica, for this. I really appreciate this presentation, Erica. I had a quick question about, sorry, this is Dunk speaking. I had a quick question about the URLs when you were going back in the references. So were you specifically talking about URLs to journal articles?
Yeah, for references, they want URLs to freely available documents, the publications that you're referencing in the products, yeah.
Right.
In a lot of cases, you can put the DOI.
Yeah.
The link to the DOI.
Yep. But
Yeah,
again,
and specifically what I was thinking of, sorry, the connection's not very good. The specific question I was thinking of was for things that are not publications, we generally don't encourage people to like put external websites in as a sort of pseudo reference.
right.
And the NIH grant application guide specifically mentions in the publications, like for references cited, they specifically address using a URL that would lead you to that article versus, their general broad, like don't use URLs in general in applications. They kind of have that information for that document. It's like an exception to the rule, I guess.
Yep.
I had one other thing to just mention real quick is the handy FYI. That's something that we've come into contact with lately with NIH and the just-in-time process and the documentation they request when we have to do the other support. I know you had, I should have jumped in when you had the slide up for the other support, but I didn't. When we do other support, it's very funny because it is labeled other support. So if you think about it logically, they're collecting information on your other support. But we've had a couple of NIH people come back when we submit our just-in-time information and say, well, you need to put the current proposal on here. And then we say, well, it says other support. And in the instructions, it says not to do that. But they made us do it. So we had to put it in there. And it was bizarre. But I don't mean to say put it in there. I think, no, don't put it in there. But they might come back and make you.
Strange.
Yeah, I wanted to call one of them on the phone and say, but it's called other support.
Right. Interesting.
I got way too much of a laugh out of it, but it was just so silly.
Right. Huh. Well, we'll keep that in mind. I mean, it's easy enough to pull that information. But yeah, I don't know how many times in the past couple of weeks I have said, I wish the federal government was as precise as they expect us to be. Our next research roundup is going to be November 16th. We're going to have our post-award team here in Eberly College talk about post-award and what to do if you get funded. If you do all of these things correctly and you have a really compelling narrative and you're competitive and you get awarded, that's when the hard work starts. So we'll talk about post-award, what to do. We do have a survey link here if anybody wants to fill it out. Yeah, please give us some feedback, anybody who is willing. We're happy to share this. We'll put this video on YouTube and our video resources as soon as we get a chance. It takes a little bit of time. Thank you so much, Katie, for joining us and chiming in, and thanks to the rest of the team, as always. So, any other closing comments?
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very
Eberly.
much.
You
Yeah,
all-
thank you, Katie, for joining us, and thank you, Erica, for this presentation. Really appreciate it.
You are very welcome. All right, we'll talk soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Have a good day.